Hi, my name is Hazel, and our group will be discussing one of the most fundamental questions in philosophy: how do we acquire knowledge? Are beliefs formed through reason alone, or must they be grounded in sensory experience? This debate is at the heart of philosophical traditions of rationalism and empiricism, represented by Rene Descartes and David Hume, respectively. Descartes lived from 1596 to 1650, and he was a French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist, often regarded as the father of modern philosophy. He championed the rationalism idea, arguing that knowledge is best obtained through reason, independent of experiences, and that certain truths, such as the existence of self, are innate. In contrast, David Hume lived from 1711 to 1776, so he was more recent, a Scottish philosopher and historian who took an empiricist approach, which means that all knowledge essentially originates from sensory experience. So, where Descartes believed that knowledge is best obtained independent of experience through solely reason, Hume believed that we can only obtain knowledge through our senses. He was deeply skeptical of ideas that could not be traced back to direct perception or our sensory perception, famously challenging notions of causation, the self, and even the certainty of scientific laws. Hume argued that what we consider knowledge is often the result of habit and association rather than absolute certainty. This project will explore the key differences between Descartes and Hume's approaches to knowledge, examining the strengths and weaknesses of each of their arguments. So first we'll examine Descartes' argument, then we will examine Hume's argument, then we'll examine the similarities and differences between them, and then we will end with our position, which I will state now. While Descartes' emphasis on reason provided a foundation for modern rational thought, his reliance on innate ideas and absolute certainty faces significant challenges. But on the other hand, Hume's empirical skepticism offers a more realistic and scientifically grounded understanding of how humans form beliefs. So, as a group, we find Hume's argument more compelling, which we'll get into later, as it better accounts for how knowledge is built through observation and experience. Through this analysis, we will demonstrate why an empirical approach is more reliable than pure rationalism in explaining human knowledge. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brooklyn Reeves. I am a freshman political science major, and I am from High Point, North Carolina, and I will be discussing Rene Descartes and his meditations. Rene Descartes is a 17th century French philosopher who is widely known for his groundbreaking work in epistemology, particularly in his meditations on first philosophy. In Meditation 1, Descartes embarks on a radical request for certainty by doubting everything he once believed to be true, including the existence of the external world and his own body. He embarks on a radical process of doubt, aiming to establish a firm foundation for knowledge. He begins by acknowledging that many of the beliefs he has held throughout his life may be uncertain, especially considering that his senses have sometimes deceived him. Descartes extends his skepticism to everything that can be questioned, including the existence of the external world, the reliability of his sensory experiences, and even the existence of his own body. To take his doubts to its extreme, he hypothesizes the possibility of a powerful, malicious demon that could be manipulating his perceptions, leading him to believe in a false reality. This hypothetical scenario undermines any certainty that could be derived from sensory perception or logical reasoning. Descartes concludes that in order to rebuild knowledge from a place of absolute certainty, he must suspend belief in all things that can be doubted, including the existence of the physical body and his own mind. Ultimately, Meditation 1 sets the stage for Descartes' deeper philosophical exploration by challenging the validity of everything except for the act of doubt itself. In the meditation of 2 of Rene Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes emerges from the radical doubt he established in the first meditation, searching for something indubitable upon which to build secure knowledge. He realizes that while he can doubt the existence of the external world, his body, and even mathematical truths, the only thing he cannot doubt in his own existence as a thinking being. Descartes famously articulates his realizations with the phrase cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. This insight reveals that the very act of doubting or thinking is proof of his existence, because even if he is being deceived by a malevolent demon, the fact that he is thinking means he must exist to be deceived. In this meditation, Descartes also explores the nature of the mind and body, asserting that the mind is distinct from the body, as the mind is a thinking non-material substance, while the body is composed of matter. He concludes that self-awareness, or the ability to think and doubt, is a fundamental truth from which all further knowledge must be built. The meditation marks the beginning of Descartes' exploration of the mind's primacy and its separation from the material world. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kendall Williams. I'm a philosophy major from New Orleans, and I will be discussing the main points of David Hume's approach to knowledge. David Hume, in his Of the Origin of Ideas from his Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, argues that all human knowledge comes from experience. He introduces the copy principle, which states that all ideas are derived from prior impressions. He makes a key distinction between the two types of perceptions in the mind: impressions and ideas. Impressions are direct, vivid, and forceful experiences, such as sensations like the five senses: sight, sound, hearing, touch, and taste, and emotions like love, fear, and anger. Impressions come from our immediate experiences in the world. Ideas are the faint images of impressions in our thinking and reasoning. Ideas are derived from impressions and are less lively and vivid. For example, remembering the feeling of warmth from the sun is an idea, while actually feeling the sun's heat is an impression. Hume argues that all ideas originate from impressions, meaning we cannot conceive of anything that we haven't first experienced in some form. He challenges the notion of innate ideas, which are ideas that exist in the mind prior to experience, rejecting the view held by rationalists like Descartes, unlike himself, an empiricist. Hume introduces the idea of the missing shade of blue. He asks you to imagine a person who has seen every shade of blue except for one shade in the spectrum. Suppose that all other shades are laid out in front of this person, or you, in a continuous gradient except for the missing shade. You might be able to mentally fill in the gap and imagine the missing shade, even though you've never experienced it as an impression. Although this idea that he introduces contradicts the copy principle and aligns more with Descartes' ideas, he decides not to address it and regards it as an anomaly. Overall, Hume's empiricist view holds that knowledge is grounded in experience, and our ability to think, reason, and imagine is limited by what we have perceived through our senses.
Hi, my name is Trista Makahene. I'm a freshman in political science major from Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and I'm going to be discussing the strengths and weaknesses of René Descartes and David Hume's approaches to knowledge. Philosophers René Descartes and David Hume present two contrasting approaches to knowledge. Descartes, a rationalist, argued that knowledge is derived from reason and innate ideas. In his Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641 by him, he attempted to solve the problem of skepticism by doubting a concept that everyone is familiar with: obtaining knowledge. He believed that knowledge acquired through the five senses cannot be certain based on the fact that different people have different accounts and that the five senses are not always reliable. In his work, Descartes emphasized the role of reason over sensory experience when it comes to acquiring knowledge that is factual and true. On the other hand, David Hume, an empiricist, argued that knowledge comes only from ideas and sensory impressions. In an inquiry concerning human understanding, published in 1748 by him, he distinguishes between impressions, which are vivid sensory experiences, and ideas, which are fainter and less lively copies of impressions, asserting that both concepts must be rooted in sense perception. Hume also famously questioned causation, arguing that our belief in cause and effect is based on habitual associations rather than rational necessity. René Descartes believed that true knowledge comes from reason and clear logical thinking rather than relying on our senses, which can sometimes trick us. In his Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641, he doubted everything except his own existence as a thinking being, which is where the famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," came from. This was the strength of his philosophy because it created a strong foundation for knowledge, one that didn't depend on unreliable experiences like from the five senses. Another strength of his philosophy was how influential it was. Descartes' method of questioning everything also helped shape the modern philosophy and science by encouraging people to think critically instead of just accepting things and concepts as true. However, Descartes' approach also has major weaknesses. Since he doubted everything, he struggled to prove that the world outside of his mind actually exists. He tried to solve this by arguing that God guarantees our knowledge of the world, but many philosophers found this unconvincing. Thinkers and philosophers like David Hume argue that Descartes relied too much on reason and ignored the importance of experience, which Hume later focused on in his own writing. Others, like Thomas Hobbes, criticized Descartes for assuming that just because he could think, that meant his mind existed as something separate from his own body. His extreme doubt also leads to the question, if we can't fully trust our senses, how can we be sure of anything at all? While Descartes' ideas helped philosophy move forward, his focus on pure reason has made it difficult to connect his theory to how one actually learns about the world from childhood to adulthood. David Hume's idea that all knowledge comes from experience is important because it helps explain how we learn about the world. A strength was that it allowed people to understand the idea that people's experiences and lives actually shape how we think. In an inquiry concerning human understanding published by him in 1748, he argues that we don't actually know that one thing causes another. We just assume it does because we've seen it happen repeatedly. For example, we expect the sun to rise every day because it always has. This idea has influenced modern science by making people more aware of how much we rely on patterns and assumptions. However, Hume's ideas also have critiques. Immanuel Kant, in his writing Critique of Pure Reason, published in 1781, argued that Hume was right to question cause and effect, but he argued that our minds naturally organize experiences in the ways that make sense, like seeing events in time and space. Another philosopher, Thomas Reid, thought Hume went too far and said people naturally trust their own senses and believe in cause and effect, otherwise we couldn't function in daily life. While Hume's ideas are useful, they also make it hard to explain how science and logic actually work, which is why later thinkers tried to find a middle ground of both David Hume's approaches to knowledge and René Descartes'.
As a quick summarization, the difference between René Descartes and David Hume can be simplified as Hume makes the empiricist argument, stating that knowledge is derived from experience, while Descartes makes the rationalist argument that reasoning and innate ideas are the source of knowledge and that senses can trigger deceive a person. Our group agrees with David Hume's claim and disagrees with Descartes'. This is because Hume's empiricist argument holds a strong logical foundation. As stated by Hume, it's common knowledge that a building with a strong foundation will crumble and fall down. But if one were to lack prior experience, they wouldn't know whether a building with a weak foundation falls down or if it floats up. In fact, they wouldn't even know if a building needs a strong foundation to begin with. They would think that all you gotta do is stick pieces of wood together to form a building. This lack of prior experience would lead to a lack of knowledge of what is to come or what is natural. It's a sensible conclusion to believe that prior experience is needed to develop knowledge of how things work, similar to using trial and error to understand a system. Meanwhile, Descartes claimed that knowledge is something separate from senses, and that the mind and body are two distinct separate things, may at first seem like a sensible and mutually exclusive argument than the one proposed by Hume, but there are some points where the arguments begin to conflict with one another. An example of that is the idea that fire is hot. or that staying in the cold too long is dangerous, or even something as simple as when a person is hungry they need to eat. Someone who follows Descartes' logic, truly throwing out all prior knowledge as questionable, followed by then ignoring the senses and labeling them as untrustworthy, would lead to a person who's hungry deciding their hunger could be an illusion or untrustworthy reaction of their body experiences. They might think that it's separate from their mind, and that just because their body is saying it's hungry doesn't mean they actually need to eat. Now, unless that person can photosynthesize, the end conclusion is that that person will starve. This can also be used when applying it to knowing if fire is hot and dangerous. If one were to ignore their senses, even if their sense of sight showed them that the fire cooked something, and then furthermore, after that cooked thing was left under the fire longer, it got charred, the person would doubt their sense of sight, that the fire is the one that heated that thing up. Even if they put a marshmallow under a flame and then were to try and taste it and it burnt their tongue, they wouldn't know whether they can trust their sense of taste that that thing was hot. Now, a person could do this over and over again, and they could go all day and never come into a true conclusion about whether their senses are trustworthy on the fire. But someone following Hume's logic would not only use their sense of sight that showed them that fire charring something, but along with their prior experiences would be able to come to a conclusion. If the person watched the fire heat something up, and then after it stayed in there too long, the thing got burnt, if they also had prior knowledge that once when they touched something hot under a fire, their hand pulled back and their mind sent signals to their brain saying that that thing is hot, you can't hold on to it, they can come to the conclusion that fire is hot, and when left on something too long, it can become dangerous and burn things. Now, Descartes could still come to the conclusion that fire is hot by using his innate knowledge as stepping stones toward a new truth. So technically, even with his system of knowledge, he could still come to the proper conclusion. But our group believes that instead of distrusting one's own senses and separating the mind from the body, and going on a lengthy process of setting stepping stone by stepping stone, Hume's idea of one's senses and behavior working in conjunction with one's prior knowledge is a more logical and trustworthy approach to developing knowledge and understanding of how the world works.